If you're calling in by phone, *9 to raise your hand and *6 to mute and unmute. At this time, I will turn it over to Brad Denz for a roll call.
Thank you. Member Hockney?
Here.
Member Peterson?
Here.
Member Raymond?
Here.
Member Reindl?
Here.
Member Roche?
Here.
Member Starkey?
Here.
And Chair Cappan?
Here.
The full board, 7 members.
Sounds good. Thank you, Brad. At this time, if staff would put the flag up on the screen, and Member Starkey, once that is up, if you would lead us in the pledge.
Okay. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Great. Thank you, Member Starkey, for that. Are there any additions to the agenda or deferred matters to discuss, Brad?
No, there are no deferred matters, but we'll be adding an item for public comment for items not on the agenda later.
Sounds good. We'll put that towards the end. That'll work. Give you a little background here, and then we'll turn it over to staff and let you know how we're going to handle the meeting tonight. Once again, good evening, folks. My name is Greg Keppen, chairman of the ZBA. You did hear the other members that are here in attendance as well. And the purpose of this hearing, as you saw, is to consider the cannabis regulation text amendments that were before you, as before the ZBA tonight. Little background: on January 1st of 2020, the Illinois Cannabis and Tax Act allowed for the establishment of adult use cannabis businesses and the sale and consumption of adult cannabis in Illinois. The county board at that time decided to put a moratorium on it and held off to see how it worked out in other parts of the county and some of the incorporated areas. After that, on February 9th of this year, the county board directed the ZBA to conduct public hearings, and that's why we're here tonight. We'll have one hearing tonight, and we'll have another continued hearing that'll take place on Wednesday at 1 o'clock. Typically, we do meet during the day, but we did, for transparency, and we know schedules don't always work for folks during the day with work and childcare and everything else. We wanted to make sure we had a good representation of the county that could participate in these meetings. So we are happy that we could have this meeting tonight, and we truly are thankful that we had those of you reach out that wanted to participate tonight. I know there's some county board members that are in attendance. We appreciate them being here as well to hear this testimony. And also, I'd be remiss if I didn't thank staff from the get-go. A lot of extra work went into this hearing. Our communications department put an excellent website together. It's been extremely transparent, and we appreciate the comments that came in prior to the hearing as well. We do have about 30 individuals that signed up tonight to speak. We will get to that a little later. Staff presentation may answer several of those questions. So when we get to you, if your topic was covered already, feel free to say pass or just say your comments were submitted online and you're okay with that. But we do encourage you, if you want to speak, you'll have 3 minutes to speak at that time. The board is going to ask questions first. So staff is going to present the text amendments first. Then the board will have those opportunities to ask questions of staff of anything they've heard. And after that, we'll turn it over to the public for public comment at that time. And it is public comment, so the staff and the ZBA will not be responding directly, but you are more than welcome to make comments either for or against, or just a neutral comment as well. And I should let you know that we do not intend to take any action tonight. So if you do have to sign off early, feel free. We will continue this hearing to this Wednesday, at 1 o'clock. At that time, I anticipate we will probably take action. But if you have to go tonight after your comments made, feel free. You can also watch this tomorrow. It's being recorded. So if you couldn't see the whole hearing, jump back on and you can check out what was going on there. With that, if anyone is going to make any comments tonight, have any questions, if you would raise your right hand at this time. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? A nod would be great. Thank you. Also, as part of the hearing agenda, recognized organizations that would like to present evidence were asked to submit a request form prior to the hearing. Staff has not received any recognized organization presentation request forms. Additionally, members of the public were invited to make a comment or statement about the proposed regulations. Public comment may be presented during the hearing by individuals, whether attending remotely or in person, or submitted in writing. Written comments that are received by 10 a.m. April 21st, 2021 will be provided to the ZBA prior to the close of testimony. Comments or statements from the public in attendance today that pertain to the text amendments will follow the staff presentation, as I said, and after members of the ZBA had an opportunity to ask questions. Also, as I indicated before, please be aware that staff or the ZBA will not be answering questions of the members of the public during the hearing, but we invite those comments to be made at that time. Public comment will be limited to 3 minutes. We do have a staff member that'll put a clock up on there, so we'd ask that you please try and keep within that 3 minutes. We'll give you a little warning if you're getting close, but we do want to hear from you. And again, thank you. Public comment for non-agenda items will be at the end of the hearing as well. Brad, at this time, I'm going to turn it over to you, I believe, to start our staff presentation, and we will go from there.
Yes, just as a matter of procedure, no comments have been received for items that are not on tonight's agenda.
Great. Thanks for following up with that, Brad. Appreciate it.
ZBA case 000-632-2021 is on certain proposed text amendments to Chapter 151 of the Lake County Unified Development Ordinance Code of Ordinances relating to the regulation of adult use cannabis businesses. The legal notice for the hearing was published in the Daily Herald on April 2nd, 2021, and Eric Wagner will be presenting the case today.
Good evening, Eric Wagner, Planning, Building, and Development Director. I see we've got the slideshow up on the screen. It's a great pleasure to join you for tonight's ZBA public hearing on proposed text amendments for adult use cannabis businesses in the unincorporated area. Before I introduce staff this evening who are involved in the presentation tonight and some of the behind the scenes work involved in making this virtual public hearing happen, I'd like to set the table for why we're here tonight to echo some of the comments the chair made at the beginning of the hearing. By now, everyone on this Zoom call is aware of the fact that the topic of adult use cannabis has been circulating. Cannabis for adults over the age of 21 is now legal in Illinois for purchase, possession, and use. And under the Cannabis Regulation Tax Act that was passed back in 2019, local governments have the authority to decide for themselves whether to legalize through zoning the businesses that grow and refine and transport and ultimately sell cannabis to adults. This ZBA hearing is the first step in a process for Lake County to decide whether in the unincorporated area, and that word unincorporated is very important here, that means outside of any villages or cities within the county. So the county is going to decide whether in the unincorporated area, adult use cannabis businesses should be zoned to operate in the future, subject to state licensing. A little later, staff will provide some additional information about the overall process and the steps along the way that will help Lake County government make the decision. A very important part of the process is the feedback that we hear from you tonight, the public. Tonight's hearing follows a really extensive public outreach effort that staff from Planning, Building, and Development, along with our partners in Lake County Communications and our county board members, have undertaken over the past several weeks, from a series of press releases, several public meetings of the county board and its committees, the release of an adult use cannabis website and public comment form for the public, multiple board member newsletters and social media posts. Our collective intention was to make it known to the public as a whole throughout the county what we were preparing to look at, how we were planning on doing it, and the role that the public would have in the process as we go forward. So tonight's public hearing is one of several ways in which the public can weigh in on the topic of adult use cannabis business zoning in the unincorporated area. And I'm happy to hear that we have well over 100 participants from the public here tonight. But we're happy to collect your feedback because it's to be considered both by the ZBA as it considers the draft proposal, and then later on when the proposal moves through the Public Works Planning and Transportation Committee of the board. And then finally, the full board as it makes a zoning decision for the unincorporated area for adult use cannabis businesses. That said, we've been at this for a while, going back to when the statute was first in the process of being enacted. Lake County at that time pursued a somewhat unique strategy of impaneling a countywide task force of both county and municipal governments back in the summer and the fall of 2019 to collectively get together and study the potential impacts of adult use cannabis legalization and what kind of regulatory strategies have been used in other states throughout the country that have previously legalized adult use cannabis prior to Illinois. Now, because the Illinois statute allows each community to make up its own mind whether to allow cannabis businesses or to ban them, the task force recognized that member communities would likely want to pursue a variety of approaches in the end. So ultimately, our task force developed a set of best practice-based approaches to regulation across the continuum of options, from banning to allowing cannabis businesses, model regulations that each local government can use to implement its own policy toward adult use cannabis businesses. And the final report of our task force was delivered to the county board in November of 2019. And on a side note, staff will talk a little later about what happened in the other communities after each had a chance to deliberate on cannabis zoning policy themselves. So when we introduced the task force report to the board in late 2019, the question of cannabis business legalization became a matter of extensive debate among the board members, and it further became clear that consensus at that time could not be reached by board members without further time to consider all the implications of legalizing versus banning businesses in the unincorporated area. So by consensus, the board hit the pause button on the process. And so instead of moving forward with cannabis business regulations, the board directed staff to prepare a moratorium for its adoption that would postpone a regulatory decision for another year to give the board and staff the time and space to look at the topic further, which we did. And so by the time the moratorium was set to expire this past February, a lot of time had passed and the board was ready to move forward with the zoning process to determine whether to legalize adult use cannabis businesses in the unincorporated area. And that's how we arrived here to be with you tonight. So now I'll go through some quick introductions. I'm joined this evening by a number of staff that are on the call and operating various elements in Zoom, which is the platform we're on tonight, to help the meeting run smoothly. First off, we have Krista Brown, who's the planning and zoning manager for the county. She'll conduct the staff presentation in a short while. Brad Dentz, who you met a little earlier, functions as the ZBA secretary. Tom Shafalo is on the call to navigate some of our mapping tools. Alex Carr from communications is helping us with the Zoom function so members of the public can speak during their opportunity for public comment. We also have other staff making sure that any members of the public who show up here at the central permit facility will know where to go to participate if they want to participate live. And we have others behind the scenes helping out in various ways to make tonight a success. We also, as the chair pointed out, have a number of board members present to listen in tonight and hear for themselves what the public has to say about the prospect of zoning for adult use cannabis businesses in the unincorporated area, and we thank them for their participation. So next slide, please, Krista. So to kick off the substantive part of the presentation, we'll walk through the various policy topics you see on the screen here. Krista will first go through some background information on cannabis in the state, along with a quick look at how cannabis business zoning has fared in our Lake County municipalities. Following that, she'll walk through some of the main policy considerations that form part of the overall underpinning of the draft text that the ZBA will be reviewing. Krista will then lay out what to expect going forward in terms of the process for reviewing the draft amendments. So you'll have a better understanding of where we're at now and then what steps remain in between before the county board's final decision on the matter. And then we'll get into the meat of the issue, which is the draft regulations themselves. That part of the presentation will begin with a summary of the proposed text so you can understand it from a big picture perspective. And from there, we'll zoom in to the text itself. We'll go page by page so you'll be able to see how it reads. Before I hand the mic over to Krista, I'd like to extend a special thanks to our ZBA members who took the time to read up on this topic and convene this hearing tonight to be with you. And it goes without saying that we would like to thank the public for your participation tonight. You're the reason for this public hearing, and we really value what you have to say, and we'll be listening closely to your various perspectives when we get to the public testimony portion. So with that said, I'll invite Krista to take the mic and walk us through the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. As both Chair Kaplan and Eric mentioned, we're going to begin with a little bit of background. So the Cannabis Regulation and Tax Act, or the CRTA, was passed in 2020, and it permitted it basically legalized the possession and use of cannabis for recreational or adult use purposes. And throughout the presentation tonight, I'm probably going to be using those terms interchangeably. So recreational, adult use, it's the same topic. As Eric, I believe, mentioned, the CRTA doesn't allow local municipalities to prohibit the consumption or possession of cannabis within their jurisdiction, but it does allow local governments to either ban cannabis businesses entirely, or they can enact reasonable zoning regulations related to time, place, manner, and number of business operations. So governments may also establish minimum distances between individual businesses, and they may require a conditional use permit to regulate those businesses. The CRTA also allows local governments to impose a cannabis retailer's occupation tax, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. One thing I'd like to note is that the use of cannabis for medicinal purposes will continue under the Compassionate Use of Medical Cannabis Pilot Program Act that was passed in 2013. So unlike the CRTA, there was no option for local governments at that time to ban medical cannabis facilities. Following the enactment of the Medical Cannabis Act, the county amended the Unified Development Ordinance to govern the siting and operation of medical cannabis cultivation centers and dispensaries in the unincorporated areas in 2014. So the CRTA does not significantly affect medical cannabis business operations or the availability, purchase, and use of cannabis for those qualified registered medical patients. But it also does not restrict medical cannabis patients from purchasing adult use cannabis. So the proposed amendments that we're going to be discussing tonight are specifically pertaining to adult use or recreational cannabis facilities, and similarly to the state statute, do not affect the UDO standards for the medical businesses. So turning to the municipal regulatory status, since the passage of the act in 2019, staff has been monitoring the status of regulations across municipalities in Lake County. And as it currently stands, there are 25 municipalities in Lake County that allow or have approved, 25 that have allowed cannabis facilities. We have, there's one municipality that has approved it but does not have any regulations. Those are shown in green and green striping on the map. And then on the other side, we have 23 municipalities that have enacted bans, which are the solid red areas on the map. We have 3 areas that are indicated with the red striping, and those are the jurisdictions that are either under a moratorium, a temporary ban, or a similar action, and includes unincorporated Lake County. Finally, we have 2 villages whose status is unknown at this time, and those areas are shown in yellow. So one of the goals of the moratorium that was mentioned earlier was to allow some additional time to learn about local community impacts of the legislation. However, as we all know, the pandemic started in March of 2020, And that greatly affected staff's ability to assess those impacts, to do the research, and to really gather any sort of meaningful information. But we did, during that time, look at research from other states that have legalized cannabis, and we did collect, to the extent possible, the data on a local level that we could. So with that in mind, we'd like to cover a few topics of consideration with you today. So beginning with the economic impacts, from the outset, overall sales of adult use cannabis were very strong, and in fact remained strong throughout 2020. In fact, sales figures far exceeded pretty much everyone's expectations. For 2020, the total sales of medical and adult use cannabis products combined was over $1 billion for the 80 dispensaries that were open by the end of December. So there was 80 total across the state. And sales across the state from just recreational cannabis alone accounted for $669 million. On average, approximately 25% of the adult use sales for 2020 were attributed to out-of-state customers. For the first 3 months of this year, total sales are close to $279 million, which is almost a 40% increase over the same period from 2020. In October 2019, the Lake County Board approved an ordinance adopting a state authorized tax for adult use dispensary sales in municipalities and on any potential future unincorporated dispensary sales. So this was known as the Cannabis Retailer's Occupation Tax. We're not able to share with you any detailed information regarding what the implications are for local tax revenues, because there are some very specific disclosure rules that apply to that information. But we have looked on statewide sales growth projections for the industry across Illinois. And based on those projections, we are predicting that the tax revenue collected from cannabis is going to surpass what the county collects from video gaming. And depending upon the number of dispensaries that may eventually open up within the county in just a few short years, could hit $3 million or more per year. In addition to dispensary sales and tax revenue, another aspect to consider with the proposed amendments is related to economics, is the creation of new businesses. So dispensaries are only one part of the cannabis industry, and there are 5 other types of facilities. We'll be discussing those later on in detail, but those are also associated with the production and distribution of the cannabis product. And with those businesses come job opportunities and commercial property tax revenues. So looking at public safety and law enforcement issues, we looked at research and studies that have been done in other states. One thing that we found is that it's difficult to do cross comparisons based on how that, differences and variances and how that data is collected and packaged. Obviously, challenges arose related to the pandemic in trying to collect local data. But what we do know is that we did get some data from the Lake County Sheriff's Department on cannabis-related possession offenses and vehicular crash fatalities for 2020. But again, it's difficult with only 1 year of legalization and that being skewed by the pandemic to really draw any significant conclusions from that. So while overall accident-related fatalities in the county were down last year, the number of fatal crashes involving cannabis use was up slightly. And the trend for possession-related offenses trended downward, but there were changes to the statute as well as behavioral changes that may have played a factor in this. One thing to note is the other thing that is challenging with looking at law enforcement issues is that there is currently a lack of technology similar to a breathalyzer that can be used in the field to detect cannabis-related DUIs. So obviously that's a big challenge for law enforcement. So based on studies that we looked at that were conducted in other states that previously legalized adult use cannabis, and in conversations that we've had with local law enforcement agencies, we do expect, one thing that we can say with some certainty is that those agencies will have increased training and operational needs and expenses related to the drug detection, to sobriety testing, and to routine testing of the, routine inspections of the cannabis facilities. Turning now to looking at public health impacts, two items that we would like to highlight. One is just impacts to youth specifically, but then also overall health related impacts. So again, analysis of local health impacts was greatly hampered by the inability to gather any meaningful hospital or urgent care data related to cannabis use because of the pandemic's effect on the healthcare system. Additionally, the pandemic also disrupted efforts to research impacts to local youth. The 2020 Illinois Youth Survey, which is a primary data source related to substance use and abuse among adolescents and teens, was completed by only about half of the students that took the survey back in 2018, which makes it difficult to draw conclusions again. So while the 2020 data does appear to show a downward trend in cannabis use among students, without having that full population sample, it's difficult to determine whether the 2020 results are indicative of a trend. So past reviews of the Illinois Youth Survey suggest that youth cannabis in Lake County as a whole has not really changed much over the last decade, but there are specific pockets in Lake County that have seen significant increases in youth use. So although analysis, again, of local youth impacts is limited, we can draw some general health-related conclusions from national studies that have been conducted. So research suggests that cannabis may pose a greater risk to teenage brains than alcohol. Cannabis use among young people has been shown to have several negative effects that include impaired brain development, increased difficulties in staying focused, increased risks for addiction and other mental health issues, and may cause hallucinations, delusions, or paranoia. And then looking at, when looking at health impacts across any age spectrum, other considerations is that the THC, the psychoactive component in cannabis, is much higher than it was 25 to 30 years ago. So this can lead to problems associated with improper dosing and overconsumption. Having high concentrations of THC in one system can significantly impair judgment and motor skills. And finally, just the inhalation of smoke can also increase the risk of developing lung problems, and that's true for anybody of any age. So turning now to look at the zoning amendments process in greater detail, Eric kind of touched on a lot of these points, but just to recap and review. So in 2019, prior to the effective date of the Cannabis Regulation and Tax Act, we did facilitate that adult use cannabis task force that Eric mentioned. And then throughout the latter part of 2019 and into 2020, PB&D staff did engage in discussions with the county board on potential regulatory options for unincorporated areas. So in February 2020, following those discussions, the board did enact that one-year moratorium to allow that additional time to study and just to kind of sit back and look and see how things played out. So in January of this year, in advance of the February moratorium expiration, the Public Works Planning and Transportation Committee recommended an initiation of the formal process to consider zoning regulations to allow adult use cannabis businesses in the unincorporated area, subject to restrictions. As part of that process, staff with Planning, Building, and Development drafted a set of proposed zoning amendments to the Lake County Code. And those amendments were based on the task force's model regulations and from additional best practice-based research that we conducted during the county's moratorium. On February 9th, 2021, the board directed the Zoning Board of Appeals to hold public hearings to consider the proposed amendments, and that brings us to today. So after the conclusion of the ZBA hearings, the ZBA's recommendation will be forwarded to the Public Works Planning and Transportation Committee. That committee will review the proposed amendments and the ZBA recommendation, and they will make their own recommendation, which will, and then finally, both the ZBA and PWPT recommendations will be considered by the full Lake County Board for final action, and we anticipate that will occur sometime within the next month or two. So turning now to look at the proposed amendments in some high-level detail. We have 6 types of businesses that are defined and authorized under the Cannabis Regulation Act that can operate in Illinois in support of the cannabis industry. Each of the 6 business types have a specific role in the production, distribution, and sale of cannabis and cannabis products and are licensed by the state. One thing that may be helpful to keep in mind as we go through the discussion of these individual types of businesses is that all 6, as they've been defined in the state statute, are included in the draft amendments and potentially would be allowed to operate in the unincorporated areas. So first we have cultivation centers and craft growers. Those are responsible for the growing, production, and packaging of the plants, albeit at different scales. Craft growers are just small-scale cultivation facilities. Initially, each craft grow facility is limited to 5,000 square feet of growing space, but under the statute, they will be given the option to expand that footprint incrementally over time, with a maximum space capped at 14,000 square feet. We have processing centers that oversee the extraction of cannabis chemicals and compounds and formulation of extracts and concentrates. We have infusers who are responsible for incorporating cannabis and/or cannabis-related cannabis concentrate into other products. We have transporters, which are as straightforward as they sound. So those entities are simply shipping facilities that move the product from the cultivation centers and growers to the dispensaries. And then finally, we have the dispensaries, which everyone is aware of. Those are the folks that are engaged in retail sales of cannabis and cannabis products to the consumer. So dispensary licenses are under the purview of the Illinois Department of Financial and Professional Regulation, whereas the Department of Agriculture has oversight of the licensing of all the other business types. So the Act set out specific numbers of licenses to be issued for each business, and the timing of the rollout of those licenses was set to occur over the course of 2020 and 2021. Like everything else, the pandemic had its effect on that rollout. And so the programs for both agencies, the licensing programs, was put on hold. And to date, I do not believe that they have yet announced when they're going to resume the re-upping of that licensing program. So a key component also to keep in mind with the state licensing process is that businesses are first awarded what is known as a conditional adult cannabis license. And then they have 180 days to find a suitable site or location, and then obtain their local zoning approval. And then at that time, they are awarded an actual adult use license that would permit operations. So looking at zoning districts specifically, this is a table that shows the proposed uses and the specific districts that each business would be allowed to operate in. As you can see, none of the facilities would be allowed to operate in any residential zoning district, and they would be limited to just 3 non-residential zoning districts. So within the general commercial or GC zoning district, 4 of the 6 uses as proposed would be permitted only with an approved delegated conditional use permit. Cultivation centers and transporters would not be allowed in GC, since those potentially have since those facilities would potentially be typically larger in size and are most likely better suited to the 2 industrial districts. Within the limited industrial and intensive industrial districts, 5 uses would be permitted only with an approved delegated conditional use permit. So the delegated conditional use permit process is typically a 3 to 4 month legislative process. It requires a public hearing before the Zoning Board of Appeals, and adjacent and nearby property owners are provided a mailed notice of the hearing, and they can attend those hearings. Finally, we have the transporters, which would be allowed by right. Those facilities are designed as a base of trucking operations that are simply engaged in the delivery of the product from cultivation centers to the dispensaries. Storage of the product at those facilities is not allowed per state regulations. And so we anticipate that those facilities will be no more impactful or use intensive than any other type of warehousing and freight movement company. And those are already currently permitted by right uses in the industrial districts. So looking at the proposed amendments, the draft regulations have been structured into 3 sections, which group and regulate the business types by their function and use. We have dispensaries in our first bucket, if you will. Those are primarily concerned with retail sales. We have the second group, which is comprised of the cultivation and processing centers, the infusers, craft growers. Those are all focused on the growing and production of the product. And in the third category, we have the transportation facilities. So within the draft standards for dispensaries, a couple of things, key things to note is that there's buffering from sensitive land uses. So the amendments set specific minimum distance from those uses, such as residential neighborhoods and schools. Dispensaries must adhere to those during their site selection process. There is a prohibition on drive-throughs and no on-site consumption would be allowed. Other components include design and operational standards that are related to parking, display, and security that those businesses would have to be in compliance with. So the second section, which covers the growers and processors, also includes buffers from sensitive land uses, as well outlines specific floor area requirements. Similar to dispensaries, there are also standards related to parking, display, and security. Finally, we have transportation facilities, which would be required to follow the general development standards of the Lake County Code, as well as those set forth in the Act. So looking at the categories of the amendments in greater detail, beginning with the dispensing organizations, that's where the cannabis is sold to consumers. This business category is the most specifically regulated of any of the 6 business types in the amendments. And that's because that's where the point of retail sales occurs, when the product moves from the industry's production side into the community. So the first standard that dispensaries are subject to, again, as I mentioned, is buffering from sensitive land uses. So the amendments set those specific minimum distances between the dispensaries and identified sensitive uses, such as residential neighborhoods and schools. As drafted, they specify that they may not operate within 250 feet of forest preserves or residentially zoned districts, within 500 feet of public care and educational facilities such as daycares and parks, or within 1,000 feet of schools. Additionally, each dispensary must be a minimum of 1,500 feet from any other dispensary. I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a moment to allow Tom Shafalo, one of our principal planners, he's going to bring his screen up. He's going to give us a brief demonstration of how the sensitive use buffering as drafted would affect the siting of the dispensary in unincorporated Lake County. And while he's getting ready, just by way of background to explain the tool that he's going to be working with, this was one of the resources that Lake County staff developed as part of our task force. So the mapping tool utilizes a series of overlays that incorporate local zoning districts, land uses, and the Act's identified sensitive uses, which include a broad range of categories such as schools, daycares, residential zones, parks, forest preserves, etc. And various buffer lengths were assigned to each identified sensitive use and through layer selection, which allows one using the tool to engage in that scenario testing of various buffer combinations. So I'm going to turn it over now to Tom.
Good evening. I have you should all be able to see the opening screen for the cannabis mapping application. And as you can see, when you first open the application, it comes up with a disclaimer, which just states that this data is subject to change because of its sources, including local zoning or regulations. And these buffers were developed in 2019, and there's probably not been very many changes, but there still could have occurred. The second thing you'll see is an explanation on how to use the application, but I'll be going through that right now. As Krista mentioned, this tool was originally developed for the Cannabis Task Force, and therefore you see there are 2 menu lists on the screen. The query menu list is not something we'll be using. That was primarily for municipalities to test buffering of the sensitive uses, and so I'll turn that off. So the most important things you have to focus on this application is the upper left-hand corner search bar, and that search bar allows you to search for a site by PIN, address, or major intersection of streets. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to focus in on the intersection of US Highway 45, and Gages Lake Road. Oh, sorry, I have to get it in there. US Highway 45 and Gages Lake Road. And it will give you an option, and you choose that option and you'll zoom to that intersection. Again, if you had put a pin or an address in, it would do the same. So I'm going to leave the municipal layer on just for a reference, but I'll be turning on the unincorporated zoning because our ordinance only impacts unincorporated areas. The county does not have jurisdiction to or authority to regulate cannabis sales in municipalities, which includes cities or villages. So we, as Krista mentioned, there are a default list of buffer distances that are included in the ordinance, and I'll turn them on. And as they go on, we'll see whether or not this area is impacted by the buffering. So libraries would be 500 feet. Colleges would be 500 feet. And you can see CLC is adjacent to this area. So we begin to see buffering starting to cover some of these general commercial zoning districts, which is the GC here, and which is the red, it's the general commercial. Parks are 500 feet. We didn't include houses of worship in our buffer, our sensitive uses, so we'll skip that. Schools are 1,000 feet. Forest preserves are 250 feet. Hospitals are 500 feet. Daycare is 500 feet. And finally, residential uses are buffered by 250 feet. So when we turn on all the buffers that are called for in our draft ordinance, you can see there is an area of this portion of unincorporated Lake County where you still see the red coloring, which is the general commercial. However, our ordinance says that no part of any parcel, if any part of any parcel is covered by the buffer, then none of the parcel is eligible for a location of a dispensary. And that's what I'm talking about right now is dispensaries. As you can see, the parcel, when I turned on the parcel boundary outlines, you can see that though this parcel is partially outside of a buffer, it is within a buffer. So there could not be a dispensary located at the intersection of Gages Lake Road and Highway 45. There are other parts of the county where there are areas where dispensaries could locate based on these buffering distances. And I'll turn this back over to Krista.
Thank you, Tom, for that. Give me just one moment to get my screen pulled back up here. Okay. So in addition to those minimum buffers that we just talked about, there's other regulations pertaining to dispensaries. One includes the 30-foot minimum building setback that they would have to meet from property lines. Parking requirements for dispensaries as proposed would be determined on a site and application specific basis rather than having to just meet a minimum number of required spaces, per square feet. Applicants would have to provide a parking study and a parking plan that would determine the amount of parking they need and how that requirement would be met both on a short-term basis and as well as on a long-term basis. So one of the things that we observed throughout 2020 with the opening of other dispensaries is that demand is often much greater sort of that during that initial first few months of grand opening. And then once the business has been open for a while, that it kind of levels off and evens out. So applicants would have to provide sort of that two-phased plan as how they're going to meet the parking needs that they would have. As mentioned earlier, no drive-through sales would be allowed, nor would any on-site consumption be allowed at any retail businesses, that including dispensaries and tobacco stores. Finally, other components are in the amendments that address design and operational standards related to hours of operation, signage, security, and those are similar to the standards that are set forth in the ordinance for medical dispensaries, and also follow specific standards set forth in the state statute as well. Looking at cultivation and processing centers, so the minimum buffering from sensitive uses that we have proposed in the amendments is a simple 250 feet from all identified sensitive uses. Again, those facilities would have to meet a 30-foot minimum building setback from property lines. They would have to adhere to general development standards within the ordinance. Parking requirements would be on a per square foot basis of floor area. So 2.5 spaces would be required for every 1,000 square feet of floor area. There would be specific floor area requirements, operational floor area requirements for infusers and processors, and also standards relating to signage, security, and video surveillance, as well as odors. And then finally, with transporters, these businesses would be subject to general development standards in the ordinance that are applicable to all non-residential uses. And that includes standards for lighting and site access. The standard 30-foot minimum building setback would apply, and business operators would have to provide 1 off-street parking space for every employee. And then finally, they also have standards for signage, security, and video surveillance, and limits on noxious odors. So now I'd like to turn to open up the packet itself. Let me switch over to that screen.
Why is there this feedback?
Oh, Tom, you're.
Oh, sorry.
A little bit so everybody can see that. So this is just as a reminder to the folks that we have in attendance this evening. So this is the actual packet of amendments that we are discussing and what's being proposed. This exhibit was attached to the agenda. It's also posted on the Planning, Building, and Development website. So if you want to, we're not going to go into a great amount of detail tonight, but if you want to read through it line by line, I encourage you to either get a copy of the agenda or go to our website and download a copy of it for yourself. But basically, we have the first section here, which is the use table, and that outlines the 6 categories that we've discussed and the corresponding zoning districts that those businesses would be allowed to operate in. And then we move into the use standards. The amendments would amend section 151.112. And again, we have a preface here, but then it moves into that first bucket or section that we mentioned, which is regulations that pertain to dispensaries. And so then looking at page 2, again, this just walks through in detail the things that we've sort of reviewed in summary. So we have dimensional standards, we have the parking requirements, requirements for exterior display, signage, and those operational standards. And then we move into the second section, which is the regulations that pertain to those cultivation and processing centers. So again, very similarly laid out and formatted to the dispensaries, but with their own specific standards. So we have the dimensional standards, and then turning to page 5, the standards for parking signage and operational standards. And then which are followed by the security and video surveillance, the limits on noxious odors, and conduct on site. And then finally, we have that third section, which applies to those transportation facilities. And again, it follows the individual requirements for those types of facilities, which are the dimensional standards, parking signage, security and video surveillance. and the odors and conduct on site. And then lastly, we would be amending the terms defined section of the ordinance. And this basically lays out definitions for each of those 6 different types of businesses that we've been discussing. So with that, that concludes staff's portion of the presentation. I'm going to turn it back over to Chair Kaplan, unless Eric Wagner has any last comments he wants to make before okay, so I'm going to turn it back over to Chair Kaplan.
Sounds good. Thank you, Krista, and thank you to all the staff for a very thorough job, and appreciated all this being available on the website as too for the public to see, as I think it again showed the transparency, and there was a lot of thought put into this. The mapping feature was something we appreciated as well, and I think the public will find that useful as well. I'm going to open up questions now from the board members. So we will start with Member Hockney. Any questions that you may have had on the staff presentation?
I don't have any questions. I would like to make a comment. I thought it was well done, very thorough. I can't think of anything that was left out, so I appreciate the work.
Great, good comments. Thank you. Member Peterson.
I concur that the presentation was thorough and the map is fascinating. I'm curious to know that have you more or less figured out how many dispensaries or cannabis related businesses are possible within Lake County with the map?
Krista or Eric, I think you had comment.
Do you want to take that one, Eric? You want me to?
I'll start out, and the subject matter experts on my team, both Tom and Krista, are probably going to correct me as I provide the initial information. So, as you can see from the map itself, from the demonstration that we did on the screen tonight, and as you can kind of extrapolate out, thinking about how the county's laid out within the various parts of the county, the buffers that are imposed as part of the draft text of the ordinance have a very significant effect on the viability of locations throughout the county. Unlike a lot of municipalities where you have sort of concentrated large commercial areas that may be segregated from residential, a lot of the county's commercial areas are immediately adjacent to residential zones. And it's very difficult to find sites, you know, in the unincorporated area that are not impacted by especially the residential buffers because of the primary residential character of the area within and adjacent to the unincorporated parts of Lake County. I don't have an exact count of the number of dispensaries in particular. To your question, Member Peterson, that would be allowed by the map or allowed by the buffers as we impose them. It's also important to note that some of these buffers are dynamic in the sense that at any given point in time, there might be a change in status over land use within the unincorporated area or in one of the adjacent villages. For example, one of the buffers that you saw tonight was the buffer for daycare uses. So at any given point in time, you may have a number of daycare establishments that are closing, others that are opening. And so the buffers are seen as sort of a dynamic example or illustration of where sites can potentially be located in the unincorporated area. And over time, we would caution the public against relying exclusively on the maps as they appear tonight on the screen, because some of the information changes over time. We get to the point where hypothetically the county board were to adopt zoning regulations for the unincorporated area, and we have these buffers in place. It's going to be important for every single proposal to be vetted through a very careful lens. And so anytime a dispensary or a transporter or rather a cultivation center, a craft grower, infuser, processor were to come forward with a proposal, staff would have to review all of the information about the business and the areas surrounding the business proposal at its specific location to verify whether at that point in time, the buffers that are imposed on the basis of what's actually on the ground at that time surrounding the property would allow the use at that location. And so, as I said, and I'm going to probably say this repeatedly throughout the evening, it's not a static map. It's a dynamic tool that we use to evaluate the potential viability of locations throughout the unincorporated area. That said, not a lot of sites are available within each of the categories based on the character and layout of land use throughout the unincorporated area and the areas immediately surrounding it.
Thank you, Mr. Wagner. Thank you.
That's good. Any other questions, Maria?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Great. Sounds good. Thank you. Member Raymond.
Yeah, I have one question. When I was going through the material here, on page 4, under commentary, item 2, adult use cannabis cultivation center, in the commentary, it says each support organization. Can you explain the support organization?
I can take that one. So a support organization is just basically any facility that's not a dispensary. So it's one that is operating in support of the industry. So it's the cultivation centers, the growers, the craft growers, the processors, etc.
Okay, thank you very much. I understand. Also, I concur with Denny. Your presentation was excellent. Thank you very much.
Great. Thanks, Marv. Member Reindl.
Just one quick comment. It was obvious to me how close the setbacks mirror the adult bookstores in the county, and that's comforting to me to see. But to staff, I guess there I am. I don't think anybody heard the first part about it.
We could hear you there. We just didn't see you.
Okay. Well, my compliments to the staff because it's a super piece of work put together. Thank you.
Great. Thanks for the comments, Sean. Member Roche.
I have a question about something that occurred to me when you were talking about the daycare. So what if the site is set up and the surrounding area changes? Then do we have to revisit, or it's there so it stays there?
If the business is established before a business, or rather a sensitive use is established nearby, the adult use cannabis business takes precedent. Now, if hypothetically that business were to shut down and be abandoned for a period of time, and were to eventually attempt to reestablish itself, that would be a different matter.
Okay.
Likewise,
but even if,
go ahead.
I'm sorry, but even if a business shut down and then tried to reopen, they would still need to get a permit because it's a new business, or not?
If a business shut down if a business was shut down and was abandoned essentially, and so they no longer intended to use the property for that purpose, but some point in time later, the use was proposed to be reestablished at that location, they would have to go through the entire, not only the local zoning process, but also presumably the licensing of the state, at the state level. And so that would be a different story. But for those businesses that are established the first time in the unincorporated area, before a sensitive land use was established nearby within that buffer area, the adult use cannabis business would have the protection of that first approval.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Well, this is a great presentation.
Great. Thanks, Member Roche. And Member Starkey.
Thank you. thank you to the staff for the comprehensive presentation and all the work that's gone in behind it for years, really, it seems. So I want to thank you for that. I have a follow-up question to Maria's in a similar vein. So, and I know it's dynamic, it changes all the time based on zoning and new businesses coming in. But at this point in time, what does all of Lake County map look like for potential sites? Can we see that, or can you get that to us by the next meeting?
So we can show a map blown up of the entire county, or we can go down quad by quad to kind of walk the ZBA through what those locations look like, and have that handy for the presentation for sure.
So one of the when you zoom out to view the whole county, one of the problems is that then the smaller commercial areas
they disappear.
Yeah, it's yes, exactly. So I would say that right now there's less than a dozen sites throughout the county. There's one county board district which has 4 potential sites, and that is the most, by far the most. And so the others are just scattered throughout the county.
Can we see what that map looks like?
Do you want me to show you right now? Is that
if it's easy?
Yeah, I can. Yeah, I can do it. Yeah.
Yeah, and just to kind of reiterate while he's pulling that up is, again, this is a point in time snapshot.
Right.
And, we doing the site specific analysis, because the property lines that are superimposed on our aerial maps are not exactly accurate. And so there might be some nuances that when you get down to a property specific level that would affect whether or not a property would be eligible for one of the businesses.
So I'm going to turn off the parcel lines and the county boundaries, just so that a municipal boundary, so it becomes a little clearer. So what you would be looking for is anything that's in red, potentially and I'll sort of pan across. So it's not the pale red, the recreational commercial, it would be these dark reds that you see. And not all of these sites are eligible either, because they're parcels that have buffering crossing into them. So you can see there are some in this area of the county, which is the northeast around Antioch, Lindenhurst, and Lake Villa. This is the intersection of Grand and 45. There's sites up at 41 and the state line. So these large industrial sites potentially are sites that could be locations of a facility, but they are actually owned by the large pharmaceutical companies in the county, and we don't believe that actually would be a viable site for these type of activities. And down in the southwest corner in the Barrington area, I'm not sure why it's not drawing correctly. Don't know why that happened. You can see there is an area this is Fremont Township, and there's 2 areas in Fremont Township, and then another area this is Grant Township, I believe. It's Casey and US 12. Let's see if I can zoom down to the Barrington area if it draws correctly now. Yeah, so it's drawing correctly now. I don't know why. And you can see this is Good Shepherd Hospitals over here. So we don't really think that's the only site in the general Barrington area that would be eligible, but I doubt Good Shepherd is going to put a dispensary on its property, at least not in the foreseeable future. This area down here near the county boundary in unincorporated Buffalo Grove is actually the county's waste treatment plant. So that's not going to be a site. And this area here is another pharmaceutical business in unincorporated Lake County. So that generally, you can see there's not a large number of them in the county.
Okay, I greatly appreciate that. I was curious if we were talking about a lot of sites or not a few, and if they were, you know,
Yeah.
okay. And then my only other question was, it was mentioned in the cover letter and you brought it up about the 2019 task force report. Can we get copies of that, or can you email us that full report?
And that's also available on the counties don't use cannabis website as well.
Okay, I didn't see that. I'm sorry.
Yep.
Then I'll get it. Thank you.
Yeah, we can also email the board members a link to it so that you can find it easily.
Okay, that's all I had. Thank you so much.
Great. Thanks, Member Starkey, and thanks to staff for clarifying that as well. Again, I think the map is, my comments are that I think the map is a great tool, not only for us to look at now, for the public and for anyone in the future, if this would pass, to take a look at that and see if where it would and where it wouldn't fit. So kudos to staff for putting that together. And I think it really, that simple presentation does really show that there are limited parcels that we have in the county that would be eligible for that. With that, are there any other questions from board members that may have come up from the other questions that others were asking?
I have
Yeah, go right ahead, Member Peterson.
more of a comment than a question. So really, in the reality of all of this, even though this map is dynamic, the reality of it is that it shouldn't create a great concern to our citizenry of Lake County, because there is a minimal amount of availability for cannabis related businesses to be established here. I mean, that's, to me, that's what it seems like. You know, granted, we still have a lot to go through and understand, but I just ask that the public maybe take that into account, that there's so many buffers that it may not be in their backyard.
I
Absolutely.
agree with the whole thing with the buffers. That makes a huge difference. I agree with you, Maria.
That's all I have.
You bet. And the buffers were, and I think that was some of the comments we heard early on, are people afraid that every unincorporated area could have a dispensary or a grow facility or something in there too. So I think that was a big important piece of the puzzle there for people to understand, and good comments there too. Anything else from any board members? Hearing none, at this time, I'm going to turn it over to our board secretary, which is Brad Denz. There were about 32 individuals, I think, 32 or 33 as of 5:30 tonight, that had signed up saying they potentially wanted to make a comment tonight. I will say, and Brad will go over the rules for that. If something was covered and your question has been answered, that's great. Staff did a fantastic job at that. If your question has not been answered, or you'd like to make a comment on it, they will not be giving answers, but we would take your comments and put those into the public record. So if you want to pass and don't want to make a comment, you certainly can do that too once your name is called. So Brad, I'll turn it over to you if you kind of want to go through the rules of how we handle public comment, and you can go through the list there, and staff will have that timer go up as well.
Thank you. Public comment qualifies as testimony at the hearing. Public comment shall be subject to the following rules and procedures. Members of the public are allowed to make comment or statement about the regulations. Please be aware that the Lake County staff and ZBA members do not answer questions from the public during the hearing. The chair shall not be required to allow every person who wishes to address the board to do so where the comments are repetitive to prior comments. Any person who is not allowed to make remarks during the public comment shall be permitted to submit written comments to the board secretary. Each person will be permitted to speak one time only unless the chair determines that allowing the speaker to address the board will contribute to new information directly relevant to a subject matter listed on the agenda. Each person speaking shall be limited to speak for no more than 3 minutes. All comments must be civil in nature. Any person who engages in threatening, slanderous, or disorderly behavior when addressing the board may be deemed out of order by the chair, and their time to address the board at said meeting shall end.
Sounds good. Thanks, Brad. And I think you're going to go through the list, and then Tom, I think you've got the timer that'll go up.
I'm actually going to, I have the list
Are
in
you?
front of me. So
Sounds
we're
good.
going to start with Kathleen Shea, and I apologize in advance if I mispronounce anybody's name on this list.
Sounds good. Ms. Shea, you are up if you'd like to make any comments. And you just have to remember to unmute yourself too once you want to make a comment.
So we'll give,
Hi, this is Kathleen Shea speaking. Hello,
go
Yep,
ahead.
we can hear you.
are we good?
Yes,
Okay,
we are.
thank you. Okay. I'd like to, first of all, congratulate all the municipalities and villages that have declared a moratorium or a ban on the use of recreational cannabis. I think that's an important distinction. The sense of your presentation tonight is very effective and very caring, and I thank you for that. However, when you use the word dispensary, that has a medical connotation. Marijuana dispensaries, legal medical marijuana dispensaries, that has a legal connotation. I would just like to suggest that when you speak of recreational cannabis regulation, that you give it a different, distinct name other than dispensary. Even calling it adult use retail store, adult use cannabis retail store. So that's one of the areas I'm concerned about, and the confusion that that could represent for all of Lake County, not just my area alone. So in my background, I've dealt with drug addiction. I've dealt with over 40 years practicing as a PhD psychologist out of Northwestern. I've put people in treatment programs. I've put people in hospitals, not for the medical reasons that marijuana is legal, but for hyperemesis, which is very serious. That means uncontrolled vomiting, okay, which, excuse me, is very familiar. I put people in hospitals, treatment programs for the use of spice and K2, the synthetic products that are often sold along with cannabis businesses. The concern I have for lungs, for the microphage of the lungs of smoking, is big in terms of the inhaling vape, smoker devices, etc. And as you know, these products are often sold with cannabis use, cannabis purchases, okay? So having obtained quite a few credentials in the area of cannabis, CBD, THC, etc., tetrahydrocannabinol, I just want to finish my comment by saying the tetrahydrocannabinol percentage that is now capable from the bud tenders, not beer tenders or bartenders, but bud tenders. It's not your granddaddy's marijuana, okay? So the average THC, CBD levels have increased in the United States percentage-wise since I believe we had a president use cannabis for a while.
Ms. Shea, I don't want to interrupt you. Ms. Shea, just wanted to let you know your 3 minutes is up. So if you kind of wrap up, that would be great.
Okay. Wrap it up in 3 minutes. Okay. That's a hard one, but I'm going to go for it.
Oh, wrap.
So
no,
in terms of
Ms. Shea, your 3 minutes is up. So if you could wrap it up.
In terms of medical problems for adults, one of the major situations with sedatives and surgery, if a person has to have surgery and have been inhaling marijuana, they have to have more sedation, more anesthesia to prevent them from feeling pain. There are many levels of medical research done with JAMA and other wonderful articles and research documentation that identifies health problems, including liver lipid problems including a lot of neurological development problems with adolescents.
Ms. Shea, if I could
and
just interrupt you
also
for
seniors. Okay, thank you.
thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you very much. Appreciate it. Also, when we do call your name, once you start speaking, if you could just tell us what town you live in, just for the record, so we can keep a list of where we're hearing from folks, that'd be appreciated too, I think, for staff.
Greg. Next on the list, we have Richard Glagowski.
Mr. Glagowski, if you could unmute yourself.
So I understand, like some folks that we had sign up may no longer be in attendance. So
Sure.
just we'll give another few seconds and then we'll move on. Okay, so I'm not, Richard's not here.
Okay.
Next on the list, we have Donnie Schmidt. He is also not here. Next, we have Lillian Garrity. Okay, moving on. We have Saqib Ahmed. Okay, I don't believe he or that person is here either. Moving on to the next one, we have a Minority and Women Urban Farms. Hopefully they're here. How about a Tong Lee? Okay, going through the list pretty quickly here. So we have next would be Joe Siraki. Okay, and just as a reminder to the folks who are, as I work their way down the list, once we get to your name, we will, if you're here, we know you're in attendance, we'll get you unmuted. So don't worry about that, please. Next, we have Courtney McPherson. Okay, not here.
If I may, Chair.
Yes, please.
There seems to be a high drop rate among our registered so far. So I'd maybe suggest a pause for a couple of minutes to make sure that we're not experiencing some sort of technical difficulty.
Okay.
It's really important that we make sure that if people want to speak, that they have an opportunity to do so. So I'll suggest for a couple of minutes that we investigate to see.
Absolutely. Let's take a 5-minute break. I'm just looking at the list of people on here too to see if any names are still sitting there. So yeah, why don't we take a 5-minute break? Would be okay with me if we want to do that and give staff a chance just to make sure we've got everybody on there.
Yeah, so we had Donnie Smith said that he's here. And
Okay.
He needs to be let in the room. That's what he said in the chat.
Okay.
We'll work behind the scenes to get those issues resolved, and then we'll come back.
Perfect. It is 6:50 right now. We'll take a 5-minute break and return at 6:55. If that's okay, everybody can take a stretch break.
Back it up.
Greg, can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you there.
I just want to thank you for the break because I was able to go out and feed my animals because I normally feed them at 7 o'clock.
Good. Glad your
So it
animals
was
can
very
get some.
appreciative.
Good. We don't need upset farm animals. And we will, for those that are on the call, about a minute, and we'll resume the meeting. All right, it is 6:55 by my watch, and we will call the meeting back to order. I know there were a couple of questions, and just to clarify from staff, you'll be unmuting folks. So once you call their name, I know that question came up. So just so the public knows if they need to unmute themselves, or you'll unmute them.
Yeah, we will take care of that.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, so we did have a number of folks who apparently had signed up, but they're no longer in attendance. I would just want to let everyone know that if somebody did drop off or got disconnected, that they can jump back in. We'll let you back in from the waiting room, and then we'll go from there to make sure that everybody gets an opportunity to be heard that wanted to speak. I believe we have an Olga Steigel. I apologize for mispronouncing your name. I believe that person is in attendance and wanted to make a comment.
Great, Olga, if you could just give your full name and then what town you're located in, you can go ahead and speak. Olga, can you hear us? I do not hear Olga. Krista, if you want to go on to the next one, we'll circle back. If there's anybody we do miss, don't worry, we'll circle back to you, but we'll just keep going through the list then, Krista.
Okay. I believe we have Mandy Florup.
Hey, I don't know. Can you hear me?
We can
hear you there.
All right. Well, I'm not Mandy. I'm Donnie Schmidt from the Municipal League. Well, go ahead and start the timer out.
Go ahead, Mayor. Happy to hear your comments.
All right, thanks. My name is Donnie Schmidt, and I'm the president of Lake County Municipal League. I want to thank you for allowing me to speak tonight. I've been president of the league for the past 2 years. My focus has been regional unity. I expanded the membership of the league to include townships. We renewed our relationship with the county and have worked with the county on many projects, events, and matters of mutual interest. Whatever is best for the region needs to take precedence over what might be best for a municipality, township, or even the county. I've been approached by several mayors to speak to you tonight regarding this subject matter. The state of Illinois did a good job creating their cannabis law. They looked at other states and their challenges and drafted a law so as not to have the same problems. For instance, in California, the supply far exceeds the demand, and there's warehouses of marijuana rotting all over the state. So the state is only issuing a very limited number of licenses. Municipalities across the county met and determined whether the sale of cannabis was appropriate for their community or not. Those that chose to allow the sale did so with great care and carefully chose the location. While the law requires extensive video monitoring, Even with the monitoring, the municipalities will be better able to monitor the sites in their towns with local police much easier than the sheriff will be able to in remote areas. Because of the limited number of licenses, especially in rural areas of the county, allowing the sale of cannabis in unincorporated Lake County will greatly limit the ability of municipalities to obtain a business. A business could open 5 feet outside my municipality, and while the county would still receive their tax, my village would not. A village in the unincorporated area virtually means that the municipality will not likely be able to obtain the business. While there'll be competition between the communities for these businesses, the county will still receive their money regardless of which municipality obtains the business. The proposed ordinance would only have a minimal positive impact to the county, but would have a great negative impact on the municipalities. The tax laws are that municipalities can impose a sales tax of up to 3%, and the county will receive 3% in home rule communities and 0.75% in non-home rule communities. While the county will benefit by the additional 0.75 from the home rule communities, it will be at the expense of the nearby municipalities. I don't believe that this is in the best interest of the entire region. Thank you. And I had 5 seconds left.
You did. Nice job, Mayor. Thank you. Appreciate the comments. Krista, I'll turn it back to you.
Okay, next on the list, we have Dean Dahl. So if we have a Dean Dahl, I know we've got somebody signed in under that name. Alex, have we gotten them unmuted?
Yeah, let me try. There's 2 of them here, so let me just try one more. Sorry.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I saw there was 2 sign-ins.
Hello?
Hello.
We can hear you.
I'm Dean Dahl. I live
Sounds
in
good.
Kearney, Illinois. Hello?
Go right ahead. Go right ahead, Mr. Dahl. We can hear you. You have your
Thanks.
3 minutes.
Yeah, I'd like to ask a few questions on how the zoning on certain properties are done. My family is on the property at Stern School and Route 41 for over 100 years. There are 3 houses nearby where proposed marijuana distribution, adult distribution wants to open up at. Of all these houses, which I am one, the one across the street from me is already zoned for commercial because there's going to be a highway expansion. 41 is expanding, the people are selling their property. It's up for sale right now for commercial. You have problems with, they say you're too close to a forest preserve. The forest preserve property around the place that the guy wants to open up his business at is all what's considered a floodplain. Even though it may be designated zoning for housing, no one can build on that because it's designated a floodplain by the state of Illinois. So why do they have to be 250 yards away from a forest preserve, of a forest preserve that has no possible way for any people to get in there and is designated for a floodplain that no one can build upon? These are questions I would like to see if you could answer to me. The residents aren't permitted there. There's no public access. It's a very busy highway, Highway 41. By defining a residential area more specifically for the instance of having to include a certain number of residential property, and defining forest preserve land as areas that are used by visitors, enjoyment, and recreation, provided by the county with the ability to address its concern, but also allow businesses to locate in appropriate business district areas. Thank you for your consideration. Could I get any response to those questions that I asked?
At this time, this is just for comments only, so the board and the staff will not be answering questions. We will certainly take your comments and add them to the minutes, and those comments will be considered as the board deliberates.
Okay.
Great.
Next we have Cheryl Van Ducey.
Hi, this is Cheryl Van Dyce, and I live in Antioch. I agree with the mayor that we need to do what is best for the whole county. And I can see how some of the municipalities who have chosen not to have cannabis businesses would be negatively impacted if the surrounding unincorporated areas did, right adjacent to them. So there's also that perspective that I think is important to consider. I have a unique experience living by the chain that I can describe, and that is that despite what we love about the nature and the outdoor recreation, there is a heavy drinking problem at times, and a lot of drug use that takes place, along with the party atmosphere of some of the people visiting the chain. A lot of the accidents that occur here on the roads and on the water have substance abuse involved. And because so much activity does revolve around the chain where the boating and the operating vehicles is not easy to regulate, that puts us at kind of a special risk. Also, I've seen that over the years, the character of the area seems to be becoming more family oriented and more environmentally conscious. And with that, people are making a lot of investment in their homes. Businesses are investing, developers are investing. And I think that to not have the businesses here, the cannabis businesses, would serve us better to just continue that trend of valuing those aspects of the area. It also looked like on the map, from what I could see, that several of the locations, or some of the locations that might be available, were in Antioch, kind of close to the chain. So I hope that some of these comments are pertinent and can be useful too. So thank you very much for this opportunity to share and for hearing our comments. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Next we have Pamela Altoff.
Good evening. I'm sorry, can you hear me now?
We can hear you there.
Okay, great. Thank you so very much for the opportunity to address you this evening. My name is Pamela Altoff, and I am the Executive Director of the Cannabis Business Association of Illinois. CBAI is the statewide association representing the existing and future cannabis operators of Illinois. We represent all license holders. Currently, we represent 94% of the existing industry, with a committee totally focused on future minority license holders. I'm here in support of the consideration of the cannabis industry operating in the unincorporated areas of Lake County and the development of an ordinance to assist in that endeavor. I want to note that the recreational cannabis program here in Illinois is the most regulated in the country, having been legalized through statute and not referendum, which is the first state to do so. The industry has experienced no product diversion since its inception as a medical program in 2015. I would recommend that you call communities housing any of these cannabis licensed operators. Have found the owners and operators to be good, responsible, respectable, professional business organizations. They are excellent neighbors. They have helped the local economy, as stated by Krista earlier, with sales tax revenues and also employment. Typically, the cannabis industry hires locally. Starting position salaries are typically $15 per hour or higher. Average size dispensaries hire approximately 40 individuals, and full cultivation sites typically 200 or larger. The industry is committed to diversity, equity, inclusion. We also are committed to ensuring that we provide educational, responsible behavior information in all of our dispensaries and ensure that we provide that to our medical patients as well as to our customers. We house 4 corporate offices in the Chicagoland area, which provides additional opportunities for individuals in finance, marketing, purchasing, human resources, etc. I'm here this evening to offer ourselves, the association, as a resource to all of you if you have additional questions. In candor and transparency, I served as a state senator for the 32nd district from 2003 to 2018. And I can also provide you with some insight, if required, as to how the Cannabis Regulatory and Tax Act was crafted and what the rationalization was behind that. So I'm from McHenry. I'm right next door. If anybody has any questions from the zoning board or the county board perspective, I await those and happily will serve as additional resource, although you have a phenomenal staff that has done an excellent job and full presentation. So thank you very much for the opportunity to kind of focus a little bit on the economic opportunity of the industry and jobs. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Pam, and thanks for your past service in the General Assembly too.
Okay, next we have Sharon Olson.
Hello.
We can hear you, Miss Olson.
Thank you. I do want to say, listening to your presentation is absolutely fantastic. Great job. And actually, a lot of my questions or thoughts that I had about it have been answered by the team. So I really don't have any other questions. I'm quite impressed, though.
Well, thank you. We appreciate it. For the record, can you just say what town you're from, if you wouldn't mind?
I'm from Antioch.
Great. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Steve Albert.
Yes, can you hear me?
We can hear you, Mr. Albert. Go right ahead, sir.
Oh, hi, how are you?
Good.
I'm in Vernon Hills.
Okay.
And thanks for putting this together. We had, it's what seems to be always happen with the cannabis issue. It turns into a moral issue, and it just seems that just seems like our bad road to go down. I mean, we talked about the side effects of cannabis, and that there are some, of course, as is there are alcohol, cigarettes, vaping. We just opened up a huge Binny's on 60 here in Vernon Hills, which I'm all for, but I just don't understand the inconsistencies of people preaching the dangers of cannabis, where alcohol has been found to be much more dangerous. There's much more fatalities. The driving is worse. Of course, we could talk about lung cancer with cigarettes. There's 15, 14-year-old kids vaping. And that's heavy duty nicotine. So, whether I'm for cannabis or not. I just think we need to be consistent. We look at the side effects of cannabis before we allowing to let it into our neighborhood. I wish we would do the same. We certainly don't do the same with alcohol or cigarettes, which are available everywhere. It's a socially acceptable thing. And I understand that cannabis has its stigma, but it's legal, And I really, I would love, if it was my choice, I wouldn't want my kid to do alcohol or cannabis, of course. But you know what? Kids are going to, whoever has kids, they're going to do eventually what they want to do, and you hope you teach them right. But if they're going to try, I'd rather they be able to get it close in the neighborhood, and not necessarily in a residential area. And I like the fact that it's regulated instead of having them to buy the who knows what they can buy on the street. I just think it's a great money maker, obviously, as I think Krista pointed out. She did point out the side effects of cannabis. She should try to, mention also, put that next to the side effects of nicotine and alcohol. So, to me, it's a no-brainer. Don't put it in a residential area, of course, but it's a great moneymaker. Our taxes are crazy. It has to help. If it's not in Vernon Hills, I'll drive over to Armour Avenue and get it. And the kids will get it in Mundelein, or they'll get it at wherever it's available. So that's what I'm saying. I just want to keep it away from being a moral issue, and we're all adults. And that's it. Thanks so much for giving me the opportunity.
You're welcome. Thanks for participating. Thanks for your comments.
Okay, thank you. We're going to circle back to Olga, and she's indicated that she's one of our 2 phone callers. So if we could unmute those 2 phone number, one of those 2, and we'll see if we can get Olga's comments.
Olga, can you hear us?
Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Good to hear your voice.
Okay, wonderful. Hi,
Go right
thank
ahead.
you very much. My name is Olga Stigel. I live in Ingleside. I have paid a great attention to your presentation, and I have following comments. It seems that the only reason why you are considering bringing cannabis business to our unincorporated regions is the money. And everything else seems to be irrelevant to you. The issue of job creation is not a strong one. If the Lake County or the Illinois government paid more attention to teaching people how to make things, manufacturing, vocational schools, and so forth, there will be more money in your tax drawers than from cannabis. Job creation from cannabis is minimal in comparison to what you could achieve in manufacturing. Of course, there is the issue of safety. We had the misfortune of having a house on our street, which was deeply involved in dealing with marijuana before it was legal. That was a nightmare. Back and forth. Kids playing on the streets were not safe. Day and night, there were issues with safety, with people being high. No matter what, marijuana is a drug and is an opioid drug, legal or not legal. It does impair judgment. And judgment in young people or old people is different, but it is still an issue of safety. And as your first guest pointed out, THC level is incredibly high. I have observed people in our neighborhood who smoked profusely, and within a very short period of time, they became a different person, and not healthier, needless to say. Of course, cannabis business invites all kind of crime, burglaries, and other activities to obtain money or cannabis by other means that purchases. Buffering zones, as shown by you, seem to be meaningless. 250 feet from residential area, that's what, 10-minute walk, 5-minute walk, 1,000 feet from school. That does not seem to be protecting our neighborhoods much. Of course, the control in unincorporated areas is minimal. We are directly under sheriffs. I cannot imagine sheriffs coming in and checking on people smoking or non-smoking in front of dispensaries. We, at least on our street, in our neighborhood, all of my neighbors, we are very much against this idea. We see no reason other than money, and everything else is put on the side in your consideration. So it's not only me, it's my family, it's all my neighbors. We are against any cannabis business in our areas. We moved out of Chicago to be in nature and be in better neighborhoods. And now we are bringing another nightmare to us. Thank you very much for listening.
You're welcome. Thank you for your comments.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have Donna Moore.
Yep, can you hear me?
We can hear you, Mrs. Moore.
Okay, thank you so much. Good evening, everybody, Mr. Chairman, members of the board and staff, and thank you for a great presentation. I'm Donna Moore, and I'm speaking this evening on behalf of my client, Jimmy Thomas, who is the owner of the Gurney Truck Stop. I would like to address the ordinance that's being considered regarding adult use cannabis dispensaries, and in particular, certain of the zoning requirements. The current ordinance states that no adult use cannabis business shall be located within 250 feet of the property line of a pre-existing forest preserve property or an area zoned for residential use. The goal with these provisions, I believe, is to ensure that residential neighborhoods or patrons enjoying forest preserve facilities are not within a certain distance of an adult use cannabis dispensary. But because of the landscape of certain of the areas of the county, we believe that some adjustments to this proposed requirement could be made. Specifically, we suggest that residential be defined as 5 or more properties zoned as residential. There are some one-off properties along major thoroughfares that we believe are not areas that could be classified as residential areas. In addition, there are certain areas of forest preserve land that are not accessible to the public and are not used for picnic and recreational areas. We would thus suggest that the definition of forest preserve property be defined as areas that are accessible and usable for recreational activities by the public. Mr. Thomas and his family have been business owners in the county for almost 20 years. His property, where Gurney Truck Stop is located, sits on 19.5 acres of land. He would like to develop and open an adult use cannabis business. He understands the strict regulation of such a business. To utilize his property to its fullest potential and add an additional business and tax base to the county, he seeks these further specifications to the proposed ordinance. We think that these proposals still maintain the goals that I think the board seeks to maintain, that residential and recreational areas are not disturbed by an adult use cannabis business, but permit such a business in areas that we don't believe were intended to be covered. So I thank you for your consideration tonight. I do have one quick procedural question, which is the meeting tomorrow at 1 the same as tonight, or is it different in terms of making
the meeting is actually Wednesday at 1 o'clock.
Oh, okay.
It'll be Wednesday at 1 o'clock. It will be a condensed version. Staff will make a shortly condensed version of what they did tonight. But your comments, there's no need for you to comment again. If your comments have been included tonight, we'll add those to the record as they are right now.
Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Next, we have Shannon Yeaton.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, Missy.
Great.
Good evening, and thank you for the opportunity to be heard. My name is Shannon Yaton. I'm the village president of Port Barrington. I'm here tonight to voice my opposition to allowing cannabis licenses in unincorporated Lake County for many of the reasons stated previously by Mayor Schmidt. Port Barrington is actually split between two counties, Lake and McHenry, meaning we can measure the distance to the county line in feet, not miles. We're a one stoplight town with, at best, a part-time police department. There is, however, a cornfield that is located in unincorporated Lake County that is nearly surrounded by Port Barrington. It is located directly across the street from the last buildable piece of commercial property within Port Barrington. If any of the 6 cannabis licenses are allowed in unincorporated Lake County, it will severely affect the types of businesses that can be put on the parcel of land in the future, including any hope of a Port Barrington dispensary. My main comment has to do with if any of the licenses, if they could require a 1,500-foot buffer from any municipal boundary line. We're asking 1,500 feet between dispensaries, but we're not taking into consideration the boundary line for the municipalities. So we would not be fighting over dispensary space. If a dispensary was to be put on that cornfield, the ability for my piece of property in Port Barrington to be built on for a daycare center, medical treatment center would severely be affected. I hope that the board takes these minimum distance requirements into consideration when making their decisions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Eaton, and thanks for your service on the village board there.
Thank you. So that I've been scrolling through the list of the attendees that we have still in the meeting, and that concludes the list of people that wanted to sign up that are still in attendance for today.
Okay, sounds good. If someone wanted to unmute themselves now, Alex, could they do that if they needed to make a comment and they weren't called on, just to make sure we don't miss anybody?
Well, they can't unmute themselves, but they can raise their hand. So like, for example, Barbara just raised her hand. So that's a good way to know.
Okay, let's do that. If anybody wants to raise their hand, feel free to do so. And we want to make sure we get you included in there. So was that Barbara, did you say there?
Barbara Denecker? Yes. So if we can, there we go.
Thank you very much. I thought I had signed up to speak, so I guess I had checked the wrong box. I'm Barbara Denecker. I'm a resident of Grays Lake, and I have 20 years of experience in drug prevention, trying to keep our youth alcohol and drug-free and tobacco-free, both at a local and a national level. I also have the unique experience of having lived in the Netherlands for 3 years, which is well known for tolerating all sorts of drug use. And I lived around the corner from a marijuana shop. So I just wanted to point out that unique perspective of the fact that in the Netherlands, it's also illegal to sell marijuana to youth, but somehow they still manage to get their hands on it, either from shoulder taps or asking older siblings to purchase it for them. And they would end up in our parking garage and the lobby of our apartment building. And in the time we were there, our mailboxes were set on fire and our car engine was tampered with. So there are definitely some externalities we may not be considering about if we don't have that experience. Having worked in drug prevention, I have a focus on youth, of course, and on dispensaries. I want to point out that there was a 2019 study that showed that young people between the ages of 18 to 22 who lived within 4 miles of a dispensary were more likely to use marijuana, use it more days in the past month, and have more favorable attitudes about it. And I just want to point out that your staff did a great presentation, but this would put youth in those areas where dispensaries are, like Lindenhurst, Lake Villa, Grant Township, and Fremont Township, at increased risk for that. And another point to make for youth is that high THC content which the state has yet to set a cap on, does also lead to increased risk of hallucinations and psychosis. That is well documented. There was a study in 2019 published in the Lancet, a study of over 11 cities in 9 different countries that showed if we could limit THC content to 10% or less, it would prevent 12% of first-time psychotic episodes. That's a whole lot of them. And it also affects me personally because a childhood friend of mine who used marijuana that had hallucinations that likely triggered schizophrenia. So that definitely hits home. And you would not have the ability to regulate that. That's something the state has preempted you from doing. And right now in Lake County, there is in our dispensaries really high THC content popsicles, tutti frutti chewing gum, vape pens with lemon slushy flavors and bombsicle flavors, and chocolate bars with as much THC as 3 marijuana joints. And I just want to point those things out as something that you wouldn't be able to regulate once you allow the dispensaries in. And it really is, for me, about protecting those youth from those unknown dangers. So thank you very much for your time. I very much appreciate your listening ear.
Thank you for your comments, Mr. Necker. Krista, if you didn't have any, did you have somebody else there, Krista?
We have a couple other folks that have raised their hands. So we have Jeff Murphy.
Great. I'm just going to say, if anybody else, if you didn't get a chance to speak and you wanted to, if you would raise your hand, or if you could put something in the chat, we just want to make sure we get you in there. So Jeff is up next, it sounds like.
Hello, how are you guys?
Good. How you doing? We can hear you there.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I'm Jeff Murphy. I live in Great Lakes Naval Housing, which we are considered to be part of North Chicago. I have placed a couple things in the chat. I don't know if that was seen or not, but just wanted to chime in. I am a business owner, father, and all that good stuff, and a community person. Love the outdoors. However, I've always noticed that we talked today about following the science. And if I'm not mistaken, I can remember in the 80s and 90s, the science says that marijuana was a gateway drug. And I'm going to leave it there because I'm not here to judge the use of marijuana or its effects. I believe those things are regulated by your person, your family. You should teach these things and how to be responsible users. Freedom is what America is built on, as well as our community. So it's not about, with me, it's not about those things. It's about our inability to use critical thinking. We look at the very good portions of this, which is the taxes, and I heard someone else say it, the taxes, the revenues, but all those taxes and revenues are going to just get ate up with all of the social programs that we love to fund with taxes. And as we all know how taxes can be manipulated and used and funneled in different directions. So there may be a problem there. Not saying that there will. However, the other side of that as a business owner is the job creation. Now I see the job creations as fairly minimal when it comes down to dispensaries. However, with the transportation section, as well as the production section, that's where the highest levels of job creations will occur. Therefore, and I'm not quite sure if this is possible, but the zoning could be divided into that of those 3 sections, and we take on the production as well as the transportation, which is, I think, would be the greatest benefit for our community, and have that here. And the dispensaries, because this is an Illinois thing, they can be other places. So with that, guys, thank you for allowing me to have this opportunity to express my thoughts with you. And hopefully you will take them in consideration.
Great. Thank you for your comments, Mr. Murphy.
Okay, so we have 2 other folks that have raised their hands. They've already spoken once, so I will leave it up to you, Greg, if you want me to call on them again.
If there's nobody else, why don't we give you each a minute if you want to kind of assume there's just a summary there, or a quick follow-up. So we'll give you a minute if you want to release those, unmute those folks.
So let's, we'll call on Steve Albert first.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, we've got you, Mr. Albert. You got a minute if you just want to summarize your comment.
Sure. Just quickly, I heard all the comments, about the negative comments, some, which are fine. I just want to make sure we just don't turn this into a moral issue. I mean, we could get on this call and talk about Wendy's should shut down because their Slurpees or whatever they call them are causing childhood obesity. It's just, I just think it's a dangerous line to impose moral on an issue like this. I just think, I'll just drive by the places I don't want to go to. Okay, and of course, somebody talked about it's all about the money. I think you would all agree that every store owner it's all about the money. Okay, if you talk to the the owner of Binny's, I don't think he'll say the first thing on his mind is the health and welfare of the neighborhood. He's trying to make a living just like you, just like I. And that's it. Thanks so much.
You're welcome. Thank you. And I think we had one more. Krista said we'll give that individual one minute too.
The last person would be Kathleen Shea.
Great. Kathleen, I think we started with you, so we'll circle back with you for 1 minute. You got there if you've got any closing comment.
Hi, am I unmuted?
Yep. You've got a minute, Ms. Shea. Go right ahead.
Okay, it's Dr. Shea, by the way.
Oh,
I just
okay,
want
Dr.
to
Shea.
compliment Donnie Schmidt. I've heard so many wonderful things about you, and you know my family, I believe. Okay, and you really brought a beautiful perspective, Mayor Schmidt, to this situation. My compliments. I want to say hello to the Warhawks, to the Warhawks of North Chicago, to Mr. Murphy, to the Panthers of Brown Lake, to the Bulldogs of Waukegan, to the ZBs of Zion, and the Sequoias, okay? And I am from Antioch. My family's here 1835, 1845. So in terms of rounding up this situation, the only thing that strikes my mind is this incredible situation that we're in and the wonderful municipalities and communities that just put a stop to it, the county board who put a moratorium on things. I just can't compliment this enough. We have enough stress going on right now. And we need support. We need people who understand other people, like Old Mill Country Creek Store, corner of 45-173, who supports nutrition during
Dr.
this
Shea,
time of tremendous stress. Okay?
Yeah, if you could just wrap.
I'm done.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Shea. Appreciate it. Krista, any other comments? Anybody else raised? Nobody else raised their hand?
Anybody else that raised their hand? Okay,
sounds good. To all the individuals that spoke tonight, thank you. Thanks to our timer. Tom, you can take that down if you want. We do appreciate the comments. We will take those and they will be added to the record as well. So thanks for taking the time on a Monday night. Those comments again will be added and they will be shared with the county board as this moves forward as well. As stated early on in the hearing, we are going to continue this hearing tonight to Wednesday, the 21st of April at 1 o'clock. Staff will give a condensed version of the presentation that they gave tonight, kind of a summary of it. We will open up if there are any other questions that are submitted by 10 a.m. Please do so via the website is the best way to do that. It seemed to work great tonight. Technology is working for once, so kudos again to staff for making it a seamless night on that. But we have nothing else to come before us tonight. So with that, I'm going to ask for a motion to continue this meeting to April 21st at 1 p.m. if someone would so move.
So moved. Second.
So move from Member Peterson, second from Member Starkey. Any discussion? All those in favor? Brad, a roll call so we could have it on record.
Member Peterson?
Aye.
Member Starkey?
Aye.
Member Hockney?
Aye.
Member Raymond?
Aye.
Member Rindo, I believe, had to leave. Member Roche?
Aye.
And Chair Kappan?
Aye.
Here continued, 6-0.
Sounds good. We are adjourned for tonight. Continue to 1 o'clock on Wednesday. Have a wonderful evening. Thanks again to everybody for participating. Have a safe night getting home, everybody from staff.